Hey Nuxters, welcome to the Nuxt Nation 2023. In this talk, we will unpack Nuxt layers and learn how to architect Nuxt application a little differently. Default Nuxt is minimal, but we can extend Nuxt at build time and runtime. If you have been using Nuxt 2 for a while now, you know that we can write plugins to extend Nuxt runtime context, and when we write modules, we extend its build time context. When we use define Nuxt module, we get Nuxt as a second argument, which is nothing but a build time context. And this runtime context is accessible using use Nuxt app composable that comes packaged with Nuxt 3. But with the release of Nuxt 3, we have a new member in this category, and that's layers. Nuxt modules are low-level construct that help us extend Nuxt core. And that's why most of the time we integrate and bring external libraries into Nuxt, while Nuxt layers are a high-level construct that we can use to isolate reusable parts away from the main application, such as composable, utilities, component library, etc. Nuxt layers are a lot easier to write compared to the Nuxt modules, where we must have deeper knowledge of Nuxt if we were to write modules. We must understand all the methods that it provides, their signature, how they work, and so on. There are features that overlap between the two, such as we can add components, we can extend Nuxt pages, we can add plugins, server middleware, and we can do all of that and more with Nuxt layers as well, while having the developer experience of writing a standard Nuxt applications. What are the layerable parts of Nuxt app that we can use as a layer? Look at the purple layer icons in this diagram. If you compare this diagram with the one on my Twitter page, you will see a lot more purple layer icon on this page. This is very much work in progress. You can follow issue 13367 to see how it's progressing. How do Nuxt layers work? It's really a two-step process. You can create Nuxt layers and extend it. Layers are powered by C12 package of Unwrapped ecosystem, where the Nuxt config of your main app points to another Nuxt config of your layers folder. And that is why for any folder to be classified as a layer, it has to have a Nuxt config file in it, even if it's empty. Then all we have to do is use extend key in our Nuxt config and add the names of our layers as an array of strings. Nuxt layers can be a local layer, it can be an NPM package, or even a GitHub repo. For creating layers, it's better if we take a look at the demo. Nuxt docs give this starter template that we can use to start building our first layer. Let's create our first layer. npx, nuxi, init, template, be the layer, and then we add our name of the layer, which is Nuxt UI layer. Now let's cd into our layer. And in our package.json, we have a minimal dependencies. So let's go ahead and install them. npm install. Now we can run our app, npm dev, and we can see our first component, which is hello world. And we also get the playground, so we can overwrite the message. Playground. And it updates there. If we comment it out, the default message from the layer will take place. Let's put it back up. And that's pretty much what layer is. Now let's convert this layer into a monorepo. So we will create a packages directory and move our layer into it. Let's give our layer a name. I would say @crew/Nuxt UI layer. Now let's cd into the root of our project. And we're going to create pnpm init. It will create a default package.json file. And here we're going to add a package manager. pnpm @862. And also we'll create one more file, just pnpm workspace.yaml. In this file, we will indicate which directories should be considered as a workspace. So that'd be packages and also apps created. This is where all our Nuxt apps will stay. So let's add that in. Now, let's install our Nuxt app in the apps directory. So let's cd into apps, and we will run another npx command, px nuxi @latest init, and then the name of our app, which is Nuxt app 1, because you can expect to have multiple Nuxt apps running in your apps directory. Okay. Now let's cd into our Nuxt app and try running it, pnpm dev, and we should see a default welcome component. Now we'll do two things. We will add our layer name in the package.json, crew nuxi UI layer. And step 2 would be to tell our Nuxt config about this. So let's copy that. And we go to Nuxt config. And in the extends key, we will indicate the name of our layer. And since this is a new dependency, we will do npm install. And now we can run it, npm dev. We still see welcome component, but let's add our hello world here. And now we see it. So this is the layer being extended in our Nuxt app. Now let's create our own app.config and try giving it a different name. So define Nuxt config, my layer, and then new name of the layer. Hello from my first Nuxt app. And if we refresh, we should see the new name. Right. Let's cd into our next layer now. And we will install on Tailwind because we want to create a theme which is based on Tailwind. So let's install Tailwind. Now, color names are hardly called by their original name when we use them in the client project, they rather become primary, secondary, success, warning, etc., and they become part of the theme. So I have prepared two color palette, primary and secondary, in my code snippets, and I want to copy them and add them in my app.config so that eventually we can override them. So let's add theme and primary, and let's copy the secondary. Now below that we have Nuxt schema, which indicates the shape of our Nuxt config, because app config. Let's add some types. In my code snippet, I have prepared some types, so let's copy them and paste them. So we have key, which has 50 to 950, which are shades of the color. Then we have shape of color palette, theme palette, and the levels. Levels being primary and secondary. Yeah. Let's bring all the types in. Theme palette, color palette, types. Okay. Now going back to the schema, let's tell our schema that expect theme to have primary colors of the type color palette and secondary color palette also to be the type of color palette. Okay. Now, our app.config has these colors, but somehow we need to tell our browser about these colors. So let's create plugin. This is going to be a Nuxt plugin. Let's call it theme.ts. Now, this theme will pick up our colors from the app config, and it'll use this two utility function, individual palette, which will pick up each palette and then convert it into CSS variables that our browser can understand. Yeah, so we'll convert this primary and secondary into a CSS variable. Let's copy individual palette function and also palette to style function. Since we are using types, let's bring in our types and just remove the unwanted ones from here and fix the path here. Let's start writing our plugin. Export default, define Nuxt plugin, which receives Nuxt app as the first argument. Now, as a first step, we want to pick up data from our Nuxt app config. So for that, we will use app config composable that comes packaged with Nuxt 3. So let's create const theme equals use app config, and from there, from my layer, give me the theme dot theme. And now I want to run this theme. I want to pass this theme into my first utility function, which is individual palette, and pass theme into it. The individual palette function will pick up each palette from our theme and convert them into a CSS variable that our browser can understand. And then we have to just add those variables in the browser. So let's check if we have style. And then we'll use head composable. This is another one that comes with Nuxt. And in there, we will use style. So use head. And in there, we'll use style option to add, to inject our custom CSS variables. So let's add children. And I want to add these variables in the root and the body element of the document. There. Now, since we have added a new plugin, we should refresh our node modules. So I'm going to copy a clean script from my code snippet and add it into the root package.json script. And let's open a new terminal. And in the project root, I'm going to run pnpm clean and then pnpm install. Let's close this terminal. And we are back into the Nuxt UI layer. And here I'm going to run pnpm dev. If everything has worked okay, we should see variables in our browser. So we already see our theme here. But let's inspect the browser, and we can see all our CSS variables nicely lined up. Now, somehow we need to tell Tailwind to use these variables instead of the one that comes with the default Tailwind. So let's go ahead and create tailwind.config.ts module export equals theme, and gonna extend so that we are not changing any of the existing Tailwind colors. And here, instead of hard coding color codes, we want to pick up the CSS variables from our browser. So that's how it should look like. So we have entire color palette for primary and secondary where we pick up the CSS variables. So let's copy that and add it into our Tailwind config. Same for the secondary. And then we can simply add both the variables in the colors object. Now that we have configured our Tailwind, we need to tell Nuxt about it because we are using Nuxt.js module of Tailwind. So under the modules key, let's add @Nuxt.js/Tailwind CSS. And before we check, let's go to our Hello World component and try adding a primary background. So let's class pg primary 200. Okay, we should see the background updated. Let's rerun pnpm dev, and we should see a green background, which is our primary color. Let's change it to secondary, and that works as well. Let's clean up our Hello World component a little bit. Now let's test our changes in our main Nuxt app. So let's cd out of our layer and cd into our Nuxt app. And we will just do pnpm dev, and we should see our hello world component there. Now let's try to overwrite this green palette into something else, but from our Nuxt app where we are using this layer. So let's add theme. And in my code snippet, I have prepared a purple color palette. So let's just copy that. And paste it here and just refresh. Right, so we have successfully overrode the color of our UI layer. This was a bare minimum example of how theming could work through layers, but we can use layers as a component library as well. So at the moment, we have that default Hello World component, but we can also have an input component there. So let's copy from my code snippet the input component. This input component is styled using primary color. And it also uses view icons, and it validates, and it also has unit test. So let's cd into our layer where we have copied our input component, and let's try to install all the required dependencies. So inside the UI layer, we're going to say pnpm install test utils, iconify view, validate core, and validate validators. So we are installing all of this in the layers and not in the Nuxt app. So when we use this layer in other Nuxt apps, that Nuxt app won't have to worry about installing any of this. And then we will run pnpm dev. However, before we run, let's add our input component so we can see it. So next to the hello world, this is another snippet I have of the input element, which is the amount field with some validation. Let's add that. And now we can do pnpm dev. And we should see our input component, which is using a primary color, which is purple at the moment. This brings us to an end of the demo. We have created a basic POC for theming and a component library. We have barely scratched the surface, but be sure to check out the repo, as I have added a couple of more examples there, which I haven't covered in this talk. If you take a look at the Nuxt config, you will see that I have created a Nuxt data layer as another Monorepo package, where I have configured GraphQL Yoga server using Nitro API routes. So try running Nuxt app and visit API/GraphQL, and you should see a simple hello world query running there. Then I have added another 3 local layers as well. Base layer, which conditionally resolves component based on the route params. Then I have PDP and PLP, and there could be a feature specific layers where PDP stands for product details page and PLP stands for product listing page. Here's an example. Here we can see how base layer is rendering product detail and product listing page, and we can still use our input component from the UI library. So here's the final diagram to sum everything up. In my opinion, I think we can divide layers into roughly 3 categories. They could be platform layers, where we can abstract our UI library, theme, authentication logic, data providers, and even reusable layouts. while feature-specific layers would deal with one specific features, such as PDP, PLP, checkout, and account if you were building an e-commerce applications. And then we can have app layers, which can contain a full Nuxt app that can be reused, say for creating multivariant websites. This brings us to an end of this talk. Follow me on my Twitter and GitHub for similar content. I'm sure you all have many questions, so please send them over to my Twitter or the GitHub repo of this project, and I'll try my best to answer them.